See you in 30. You guys get together?
You ready? All right, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to Dawn at Oaklawn. I do a horse equipment Dawn at Oaklawn every year because it is a very important part of horse racing, and this year I'm calling it Bits, Bridles, and Blinkers, Oh My. So I am going to take this helmet off. It's obviously not mine, so I don't ride. This is trainer Tom Van Berg. I have known Tom for years and been a friend of the Van Berg family for years as well. Tom, like many in the horse racing industry, we are bred into it. Tom's father, Hall of Fame trainer Jack Van Berg, and his grandfather, Marion Van Berg, a Hall of Fame trainer as well. So let's go ahead and get started. And I wanted to kind of have a progression of starting out in the morning from when you get to the barn, how we get horses ready. So we get horses ready, we prep them for training, and we do that by brushing them and getting them ready for the training process. So horses are kind of like a trainer's calling card. We want them to look good, we want them to look clean, and by doing that, we get them pretty and shiny. So we do that with brushes, with curry combs, and with hoof picks. Horses are in their stalls for a good amount of time during the day, and we do that. They walk around in their stall, and they get a lot of stuff in their hooves. And that is what this tool is for. So Tom, explain that to us.
Unfortunately, this looks like my groom's kit, very bare and minimal. But there's a lot more that we have that goes with the horses. First thing, most important with the horses, their feet. If you don't have a foot, really you don't have a horse. And it's imperative that they keep healthy when they're standing in manure or mud or dirt and go out on a muddy track every day. You make sure those hooves are cleaned, conditioned with oils and supplements on them. And this is the first part of that day, is getting all the manure and mud out of them. So this is the part of the hoof pick that actually picks the dirt out of there, and they can brush it clean with this. It's a stiff bristle brush. It'll clean it out of there, and you get that foot nice and clean for the horse. So the hoof is healthy. You make sure there's no cracks in it. Make sure the shoe is on tight. There's no nails sticking out, and we don't have no problem with the feet. That's the first thing you want to address every morning before you get the horse ready to go to the track. Then you go to brushing the horse off, and as you can imagine, these horses are laying around in dirt or manure all day long, and so you need to get their coats clean. The horses will produce a natural oil the more you brush them, and so these will brush when you brush off. You got a rubber curry comb, which is a little black rubber kind of handheld mitt that has little nubs on it, and you get all your caked dirt or manure on them off, and then you take them with a harder brush, a firm brush, and then you'll actually have a finishing brush that's really soft, something more like you would feel for a human, and that's your finishing brush, and you get them clean, their coat clean. And you'll see, like this time of year, horses, when they start to bloom, when you start to see those round spots on them called dapples, the more these grooms are brushing them, the better they're going to look. It's a horse's natural way of showing that they're healthy. If the horses aren't brushing them, the grooms aren't brushing them daily, you'll see longer hair on them. It won't be as shiny. The coat won't be as clean. The horses kind of tell you. And so if you're looking out in the paddock and see these horses come out, you can kind of see which ones have been taken care of and which ones have kind of got a little bit lack of care in them. So it's something to pay particular attention when you see them in that paddock, to see that coat, make sure it's clean and healthy, and the horse is shiny and happy.
And we'll point those out in the paddock. They almost look like underneath the skin polka dots. That means that the horse is happy, they're healthy, they're getting a good diet, and it's just they're in peak physical health as well.
And a lot of times it's not always the groom. I mean, sometimes those horses, if they're not healthy inside, horses are bred to be outside 24/7, and unfortunately in the environment that we're in, they're in a stall for the majority of their time. And so sometimes they'll create ulcers because they're not used to getting their head down and grazing like they normally are, so they're in a stall doing it. And so sometimes it'll be internal, and the horse has to be healthy internally too to be on healthy on the outside. So sometimes not necessarily always the groom. So if you see a dull coat, always make a note of that. If you see a healthy coat, make a note of that as well, because you're going to tell how the horse will probably perform.
So how many of you have pets at home? All of us have pets. Well, all of our pets have a collar. Horses have kind of a collar as well. This is what horses have. It's a halter. And they have their names on them as well.
Yeah, this is very important piece of equipment because you can imagine a 1,000-pound animal wanting to do something that it wants to do, not what you want it to do. This is the first thing you grab, especially when they have a very strong jaw and big teeth. This will help you stop them from getting, over on top of you, grabbing you. This is also another piece of equipment that we utilize a lot. This is called the shank. It's basically like your leash for your dog. So you put your shank through the halter, and then you can take them out of their stall and walk them around and take control of them that way.
Some horses you can lead around at the very end of the shank, and others you have to have right up very close to the halter.
Yeah, there's various ways of attaching the shank to them, and there'll actually be some of the tougher ones. You put what's called a lip shank on them, and a lip chain on them. You put it under their lip, and you can put pressure on with your finger, and so you cause how much pressure goes on the lip. And what that'll do is actually release endorphins into the horses, that spot underneath their lip right there, and so that'll actually control them a little bit. If a horse isn't respecting the shank enough, just over its nose, you can put it inside and under their lip, and it'll help you control them a little bit more. And then you control, the person controlling the horse can actually put different pressure on the horse to see how much you need for that particular individual.
I lead my husband around that way with a
That's
lip
probably
chain.
a good idea. I know your husband.
I'm kidding. So that is the way a halter and a shank, once horses are led around the barn that way, either when they're just after they go to train, they're cooled out at the barn that way. It's called hot walking. But when they get tacked up, this is an exercise saddle. This is a very important part of equipment. And this is very different from a jock saddle. You can see the difference in a jock saddle. And I didn't notice this until I got it this morning, but it says RIP Brains on it. So you can see that jockeys and exercise rider, they do put their lives on the line every time they go out to get on a horse. But you can see the difference. This is extremely light in comparison. How much do you think an exercise saddle, that specific one, weighs, Tom?
Maybe 6 pounds.
6
5
pounds?
Yeah, 6 pounds.
And
Yeah.
compared to a exercise
Ounces,
saddle,
mere ounces. I mean, it's not much.
Compared to ounces, basically a jockey saddle, you really only need the irons and a string, because that's all the jockeys don't sit on this.
Yeah, you compare it to basically bicycle seats. So if you're going out for a ride for a while, as entertainment, enjoyment, you're going to put a nice, comfortable seat on your bike, okay? In the Tour de France, you're not going to be in that saddle whatsoever. So all you're doing is putting something there that you need to sit down on for a moment, okay? Protect yourself. That's all the jockeys do. So they're mostly in the irons. They don't use this at all. And the thing about jockey saddles is this is counted as weight that the horse carries. And so to make weight, so say if a jockey's carrying 118, that's including all his tack with him, okay? So if a jock, you can imagine he's 5'3", 5'4", but he's a broader build, and he's 118 naturally, and he has to make 118 for a race, he doesn't want a 5-pound saddle adding the weight to him, okay? So he wants as little as weight as possible to add to his weight. And so that's why they're smaller, is that jockey doesn't have to reduce to cover the weight of that saddle too.
So a valet is very important in a jockey's corner. A valet is the person who goes out during the races and saddles the horses. This is almost like the belt that is attached to the saddle, and you'll see a horse kind of go, huh? When this is cinched up. And there's different sizes, and this is called a girth. Sometimes if a horse has a bigger barrel or a bigger roundabout, if you will, this is what's used to go underneath the underside of the horse, and this is what the trainer will cinch up on the underside. And you'll see a jockey, when they get legged up, they'll cinch it up even more. And sometimes you'll see a horse kind of take a big breath.
Yeah. This here is actually the overgirth. So there's actually 2 girths that you put on a horse in a race. There'll be one that'll attach to the billets on the saddle, just like you do in the morning. Okay, that'll be the first one you put on. And then the overgirth will actually go over the saddle, and that's a second layer of protection for it. So it'll actually go over the saddle, and the jockey will actually sit on that one. So you'll see two girths when they, first they'll cinch up the one underneath that goes to the attach the saddle, and then we'll put this one over on the second one just for protection and extra security on it. So this is actually called what's called an overgirth, but they're very similar. They're both made out of elastic, same double elastics. It makes it stronger so it doesn't break. I've had some issues of breakage on equipment lately, so it needs to be in good shape all the time.
And let's talk about that real quick, because keeping your equipment in good form is extremely important, because when your equipment breaks, it can be very scary. And Tom actually had that happen in a race. And part of a bridle, or part of a, well, you tell the story, Tom.
Well, we actually ran about a filly about 2 weeks ago, and we check the gear every morning, check the reins, check the bridles, check the bits that go in their mouth, all the equipment. And she broke out of the gate, and just going into the far turn, I see her jump the horse in front of her heels and goes right to the outside, bolts to the outside, and Rafael Bejarano was on her, and he jumped off. And I was like, what in the heck happened to her? I thought maybe she got injured or something like that. But what had happened is he came up behind horses, and when he went to steady her, he pulled on this left side of this rein right here, and the rein snapped. The leather broke. And so he didn't have any control over her. And the more he tried to pull to the right to try to stop her, the more she went out. And he was worried that she was going to go over the outside rail. And so he basically just jumped off to let her kind of control herself and bring herself back down to speed. So I haven't had that in my career. I've been doing this a long time, but the actual leather right here on the buckle, it broke, it snapped, the leather snapped there. And so he had no control of the horse, and he was just a passenger with a filly that was wanting to run. And so it's very scary, especially for him. Then, so if that didn't start enough, I just had this happen this morning. So a horse was on the track jogging this morning, coming off the track, and he did a big leap in the air, and the bracket in the bit here snapped on him. And so he just came back with this in his mouth, and I had to lead him back to the track. So I've never seen this happen in a long time. I mean, I can't remember I seen the bracket actually break. Usually what happens is you'll see the part of the metal here will wear thin. I've never seen the actual inside bracket break on a bit before, but it's not old. But so that's what you have to worry about all the time. So you're always inspecting your equipment. It can be very dangerous if stuff like this happens. It just so happened that the horse was 15 feet away from me, and I can get a hold of the horse and help him off the track with the rider, so we didn't have to get anybody in trouble.
I mean, to have two bits break in that short a time span, that's unheard of.
Yeah, it's been a tough couple weeks. Yeah,
I mean, that's
a
$1 million to 1, more than likely.
I was telling Nancy same thing. My assistant's out in California doing his taxes, getting his license, so he took 4 days off. So I've been back in the barn, and then I didn't have an employee show up today, so I've been walking horses. So this is all going on at the same time. So it's something we deal with, as trainers every day. Is you're always kind of trying to, I guess, address problems or issues, and you're trying to figure out a solution to stuff like this. So we keep on going.
So the purpose of a bit is almost like the steering wheel in a car. It allows the rider or the jockey to steer the horse, and there are different types of bits in the horse's mouth, and it's the rider's responsibility to figure out the type of bit that is used. And they are attached to the bridle, which does go over the horse's head, and they're attached to the reins on here. And this in particular is a ring bit. So explain the purpose of a ring bit.
Yeah, what this is particular, so this part here, without that ring, if you can see it here, is called a snaffle. So any bit that has a break in it in the middle, and it's easier on the horse when it has that break in there. If that was solid, it's more severe. It's more severe on the horse's mouth, the bars of its mouth. So any type of break, that kind of releases pressure in the horse. So this is called snaffle. When they put the ring on it, that's actually to control the horse a little bit more. That's tougher. That helps the rider out. And so that's called a ring bit, or it's a ring snaffle, but they call it a ring bit for short. So there's different bits depending on what the individual horse needs. Each horse has different, requirements compared to, just like children they all have different mentalities. Some want to go harder, faster, stronger. Some don't want to pay attention. Some are easy to get along with. Some are real tender in their mouth, so you give a lesser bit in there so you don't harm and they don't resent it. So they all kind of address different attitudes or behaviors on the horse, and so we change bits, and that's the job of a trainer to figure out what horse is going to respond to what bit, and then you change your equipment based on the horse itself.
So the riders that you see on the track right now all have one thing in common. They are wearing safety equipment. They all are wearing a helmet and they all have on a safety vest. Safety is the #1 key in horse racing. It's not if an accident is going to happen, it is when. There is an ambulance stationed down at the end of the ramp. There are EMTs present. Anytime there are horses on the track, there are veterinarians stationed on the racetrack at all times. And these have, I mean, this is when a rider goes down, it's going to absorb some shock for that impact. So all of these have certain safety requirements, certain standards that they do have to meet. This is actually Crystal Conning, my co-host, and she is a professional jockey when she is not my amazing co-host. So there's always certain standards and advancements in science that are amazing that are being met. And the way that the whip has advanced in just the last 50 years, even the last 10 years has come a long way. There used to be a leather popper with leather feathers. Now it's almost a Nerf texture, and you can't cut a horse with this anymore. And now a horse is only allowed to be hit 6 times in the entire running of a race. And if they are struck more than 6 times, it is a monetary penalty and a 1-day suspension. So there's a lot of new restrictions in horse racing as well. Getting back to the equipment, another piece of equipment that you might see is this. It looks like a fuzzy green monster, but it also comes in white and different colors. But this is very interestingly used, and this is called a shadow roll.
So one of the things that horses struggle with based on their makeup is their eyesight, okay? Horses are a fight or flight animal, but majority of the time they're flight. And so their eyes, what they perceive with their eyes is very different from what a human perceives. And so we have about a 90-degree range of vision, 45 degrees on either side of us. So if you put your hand out directly to the side of you, you can't see it if you're looking forward, okay? Horses basically have a 350-degree range of vision, okay? So they can see if you take a point outside their back hip, that's almost in the center of their vision because their eyes are on the side of their head, okay? What happens, though, with that is how they perceive objects is very different than us. They have a very small range of binocular vision, which you can see depth perception. Majority of their range is monocular, so it's only one eye, so they can't tell how far or how close things are. The other difference is horses' vision, it requires an object to be 50% closer to get the same amount of acuity that we would get with our eyes. And so what they're seeing out, 10 feet, 20 feet out, 30 feet out, is very different than what we see. So they see a shadow on the track, or a dark spot, or somebody moved the starting gate and there's a hole there, kind of a little indentation in the track. What they perceive that to be and what we perceive that to be is very different. And so they're going to go run at 35, 40 miles an hour, and all of a sudden within 5 feet they see this thing come up to them. They don't know what it is, and they think they're going to have to jump it. It might be a hole. And so that's what this protects them. So horses that are more prone to changes in the surface below them, you'll see what they'll do is when they see something, they'll raise their head to get a better eye vision of it. They'll change their vision perception of it by raising their head. Okay, and then they'll get their head up and they'll go to look like they're going to jump something. This stops them from seeing that. And so what they're perceiving now at 5 feet, they're going to see further out, and so it's not going to affect them when they get closer to it. Some horses are more prone to that, some aren't. So some horses you'll see have this on, some don't. And so it's a piece of equipment to help correct their perception of what they're seeing underneath them coming up on the racetrack.
Another thing that will help allow horses to focus are blinkers. And I always joke that like a thing that women will wear, there are also different cup sizes of blinkers. And these are a few different cup sizes of blinkers, and there are many, many different options. And one thing that you will notice give the size of this example, Tom.
So this is what's called a French cup. And so this is for a horse that doesn't need as much correction to their vision. And these are going to be full cups with a hole in them. Okay, the full cup is for a horse that is more distracted by objects behind them or to their side. Okay, this will help them focus all their attention in front of them. The hole here a lot of times will be used for them to get a glimpse of a horse coming up its side. So in case it's on in the front and a horse is making a run on it, that one horse wants to be able to see it sometimes. So it actually re-engages and competes with that horse. If they're totally closed off, they're just relying on their sound, the sound of the horse and their ears. So different horses need different cups. Same thing. So some horses are affected by a bird that flies out here, another horse that moves out here, some patrons on the track that are watching the races, okay? We had a horse a long time ago in 84 that he'd hear the roar of the crowd, and he would get his head up and look at him, and then he would lug in and hit the horse inside of him. So we had to use blinkers and another piece of equipment that we'll show you here in a second to kind of correct that. But horses all have different behaviors, and as trainers, we need to figure out, and your riders and your jockeys will kind of come back, give you feedback and saying, hey, this horse isn't focusing. He'll run in spurts. He sees another horse beside him, he'll stop. A horse comes outside him, he stops, and he starts running again. So we use these blinkers as a way to help them focus. And so what we're going to do is we put the blinker on the size that helps out till we find out what they need. Okay, we'll experiment with them to try.
And that's a classic example right here. A horse right on cue is training in blinkers. That's a big handicapping angle, is you might see a horse put blinkers on for the first time. It allows them to focus, and you might notice, you might watch a replay and see the horse was maybe erratic in the lane. He might have been looking all around, and a horse or a trainer might have really good stats with putting blinkers on for the first time. That horse is going to be a lot more focused. He might run more forwardly placed, and you might see trainers taking blinkers off. He might relax a little bit more. So that could be a good handicapping angle as well. So we see trainers putting blinkers on, but what's a good reason why trainers might take blinkers off?
We had a great example just a week and a half ago. We claimed a filly, and she was very well bred. She's by a popular stallion named Gunrunner, but she was very aggressive. She was fast, very aggressive, come out of the gate quick. She would go to the lead, and the previous trainer had blinkers on her. And so what I noticed is she would go to the lead, she would relax, and then when she wouldn't, she'd get to the stretch, and then the horse would pass her, and when she'd see that horse pass her, she'd take off again, like she wasn't using everything she had. Well, what was happening is she's extremely competitive on her own. If she couldn't see that horse beside her, she didn't know it was there until it got into her vision, and then she would re-engage and try to get that horse again. And so what would happen is 50 feet from the wire, she would get passed. Well, then by the time she got going again, that horse, she would run second over that horse, and then she would gallop out way in front of that horse. And so we took blinkers off, and she just came back off the other day named Pistol, and she won. And there were two horses, one on either side of her, and she was in the front, and they both engaged her. And I mean, she was all out trying to beat them, but she would not let them pass her. And it was simply because she could see those horses and compete with them. If we had the blinkers on again, I think probably both of those would have passed her, and she would have probably been third. And it was a difference between 10 inches between the three of them. So, I mean, it really helped her. So different horses need different things. If a horse sometimes drops back early in a race and doesn't engage early and shows no speed, sometimes you put blinkers on them, it'll get them more aggressive and get them up north of the front, and they don't have to do as much work coming down the lane trying to catch, the horses that are up in front of them. So there's different reasons why you put blinkers on or take blinkers off, and it is a good handicapping angle, and there are, some trainers that are more astute at it. You see better stats when they do it. Some trainers just are trying to get it changed, and so they'll claim a horse, they'll buy a horse out of a race, and next time they'll run it, they'll try to change that equipment to see if they can make a difference in the way the horse is running.
Well, horses are just like us. They are each individual. They have their own distinct personalities, and a very classic example of that was Gato del Sol.
No. Gate dancer.
Gate dancer. Sorry.
Same era about, same time frame. Yeah.
Was gate dancer, and Tom's dad, the late great Hall of Fame trainer Jack Van Berg, fashioned something after a trip abroad, and some made fun of him, and it cost a jockey.
Yeah.
But it worked out for another jockey.
Correct. So these are what we call earmuffs for horses. Okay, most trainers put cotton in their ears for a horse that's very sensitive to sound.
And you'll see that in the paddock, either sponges or
you'll see white
cotton
pieces in their ears if you watch them walk around sometimes. And it's for nervous horses that don't handle sound well. But this particular horse had a little bit different story. He had a tendency when he would come down the lane, that he would hear the crowd, and he'd turn his head to look at the crowd, and he would duck in. It's called lugging in. And he would bump horse on the inside of him, and he'd get disqualified because the rider was trying to steer him, and he'd bump a horse, and the stewards would disqualify him and take him down. And so my father was in South America on a trip down there, and they had what are really called bug screens, and they put them horses that are out in the pasture to keep the bugs from their ears, and so they don't get in their ears and bother them. And so he saw those, and he's like, well, he was always kind of a thinker, and he said, well, what if I put some padding in there? So that furniture padding, if you've ever seen in cushions, that yellow foam, he got somebody to turn the earmuffs inside out and put that foam in there and sew a layer of earmuffs, foam in there to stop sound, so the horse didn't have the cotton in his ears. And so he tried them out, and the horse ran in the Kentucky Derby, and he was kind of round, but Eddie Delahousse rode the horse. And he came back, he said, Jack, he said, I'll never ride that horse again. He's embarrassing. He said, he looks like Bugs Bunny with these ears on him. He said, I'm not going to ride him. And Angel Cordero got on him for the Preakness, and he ended up winning the Preakness with a pair of these on, and he ran straight and won the Preakness Stakes with him. But it was just one of those things that to be around the horse and see why they're acting. Horses really want to speak to us, and they will speak to us in their own way, but we got to be willing and open enough to understand what they're trying to tell us. And so to see him doing that, it wasn't a problem with him physically, and it wasn't his eyes, he was hearing things, and he would get distracted by what he heard. So when that roar of that crowd would come up, he would pay attention to it, and they wouldn't pay attention to the horses around him. So it actually, the story goes on that in the Breeders' Cup, he was running, and he was on the outside, and there was a horse named Wild Again with Pat Day on him, and what was the gold horse? I can't think of the third horse in there, but they were coming down the stretch, and they were Slew of Gold, exactly. There you go. Yep. And there was some bumping in the stretch, and I was relatively young at the time, and they disqualified Gate Dancer, and it was out at California, and I remember going into the steward's office to watch the replays. And so this was happening 10 minutes after you just get beaten, well, at the time one of the richest races in the world, and they get in there and they end up taking Gate Dancer down and disqualifying, and they move Wild Again up to win. And you could watch the harrow marks of the tractors. When they renovate the tractors, harrow marks, the tractors go, along the rail, and so they go even with the rail. So my theory was, if your horse is on the same harrow mark all the way down the stretch, well, he didn't go anywhere. He didn't change paths. He didn't change lanes. And Gate Dancer went down the same harrow path the whole way. But because it was notorious for lugging in, the stewards weren't looking at that. They were just knowing his past behaviors, and they disqualified without taking all the evidence, visual evidence, into account. And I still give Pat Day a hard time to this day, because he'll fight tooth and nail, saying, no, your horse lugged in on me. And I'm like, no, actually the horse inside of you was coming out. If you watch the replay, we went over replays multiple times, and he's like, Tom, I'm telling you, Gate Dancer came in on me. I'm like, I'm telling you, watch the harrow marks, you're wrong, because the horse inside Slew of Gold came out about 4 or 5 harrow marks from the top of the stretch to the finish line.
I look at tractor marks too.
Yeah. So I don't know, but this was the result of a behavior in a horse that my father was trying to correct. Is he would hear things, and we stopped him from hearing things, and he behaved better.
Papa Jack was a pioneer beyond his years.
Yeah, he was always thinking about stuff to do. It was, now it's funny to see on the backside they have these equine spas, and I don't even know, what is it, 75,000, 80,000, 100,000?
6 figures.
6 figures, yes. So over 100,000. I remember in the 70s, we had what were called turbulators, and some of these guys up here remember turbulators, but they were basically an electric engine that would pump air, just like a jacuzzi, into a tub of ice cold water. And we put their the horse's legs, you stand them in that tub of water, and you put that turbulator in to get the basically turbulator effect, the jacuzzi effect with cold water. And it would take inflammation out of their legs. Inflammation in a horse's legs is a big thing. And so Dad said, well, you can do their front legs, basically above their knees with a tub. He said, what if we could do all their legs at the same time? So he took a 2-horse trailer, bumper hitch 2-horse trailer, cut the top off it, caulked it up, and he'd walk the horse into the trailer, fill it up with ice water, and he had turbulators on all 4 legs, and we could haul that turbulator from track to track. And this was in the 70s. And now, basically in the 2000s, 2010, they come up with these big custom made turbulators for these horses, and they charge you, $90 or whatever, $60 a treatment, and they do 20 treatments a day to horses on the backside. But he was doing that back in the day. And then another thing he did, he took another 2-horse trailer. He said, well, I can do cold water on that. He said, what if we could do a sauna for a horse? And so he took another 2-horse trailer and took a big old canvas tarp, the old heavy tarps, back in the day, not the plastic ones. And he would put it up, and he'd walk the horse into the thing, put the tarp around its neck, and close it in as much as possible. And he had a heater on the side, and he'd put water in there and steam them, and he'd put a steam sauna on this horse. And I still remember as a kid is, horses, like I said, will tell you when there's something wrong. And so you'd walk a horse in there that was perfectly healthy and nothing bothered him, and he'd walk out and he'd be clean as can be, and there wouldn't be anything on him. You'd walk a horse in there and say maybe his hip was bothering him or whatever. That hip would look like you took a bar of soap and just put a big lather on it, and just in that one spot. And he would show you physically what was wrong with him, and the horse would respond to whatever treatment they had. But that was some, odd things that he would come up with in the 70s, just trying to improve and get better every day. So these were another thing that he just, he couldn't stop thinking about it, and his mind was always going. So it was always something trying to help the horse out.
Great name in racing, one of the greatest families in racing. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. Bits, bridles, and blinkers, oh my. Thank you everyone for coming out for this Saturday's Dawn at Oaklawn.
Thank you guys. Good luck today.